Welcome to the Health Fix podcast, where health junkies get their weekly fix of tips, tools, and techniques to have limitless energy, sharp minds, and fit physiques for life. Hey Health Junkies, welcome to another episode of the Health Fix podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jannine Krause. And today, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about travel. We're going to be talking about traveling with cardiovascular conditions and how not to get sick while traveling. Now, I am piggybacking off of a podcast I did, episode 612, the one right before this, where I'm talking about cardiovascular conditions, because boy, it seems to be something that's showing up quite a bit in my practice, and because cardiovascular disease is the number one killer of adults worldwide. This is something we got to talk about. And in this episode of me diving into some of the experiences I've had with cardiovascular conditions, especially living in the high altitude environment in Breckenridge, Colorado, some of the things I've seen with folks traveling from sea level to altitude, what to think about, and other considerations as well. So if you're thinking about traveling, this podcast is for you. And if you've ever wondered what to do to not get sick while traveling, also, this podcast is for you. So let's dive in. Hey, so where does this podcast come from? Why am I talking about travel? Well, it's been something on my mind I really wanted to do after years and years of loving travel and seeing the effects that travel has on folks, good and bad. So I created a little bit of a side business called Travel and Transform. And I wanted to introduce it on the podcast, but also wanted to talk about travel and why it's good for our heart and why it's good for thinking about how you can transform your health using travel. Travel medicine is a big deal. And most people think of travel medicine as you see the travel doc to make sure you've got all of your vaccines or whatever it is that you need to have in order to go see a certain country. And making sure you are covered for all of the different things that you may come into contact there with. But what you don't think about necessarily is little intricacies. Like we think about the big meds, like maybe needing malaria meds if you go to Africa. But what we don't think about is what happens if you get traveler's diarrhea, or what happens if you have a cardiovascular event, which is something that I saw happening a lot while I lived in Breckenridge, Colorado. And, you know, it's no secret, Breckenridge is high altitude. It's in the Rocky Mountains. It is 9,600 feet above sea level, at least the town is, but the surrounding areas, you could be going up much higher from there. And if you want to go hike or you want to get into the mountains deeper, you're gonna go up to higher elevation. So we have to think about what does that do to the body and how can we prepare for this? So let's dive into this podcast where I'm kind of melding medicine and travel. I was talking about how travel is so good for your heart. And when I say for your heart, what I mean is joy, enjoyment. New experiences bring about new thoughts. It can actually help with your cardiovascular system in the long run. There are some really cool data points on how even just a week of vacation can help lower your heart rate variability. It can help with your overall outlook on life and many other things. Even the period studied before you go on vacation shows that you are most happiest in that moment, in those couple weeks leading up to your vacation, because you know that you are going to catch a break. And I can't help but laugh about that because I know I've been there. And if you're listening going, yep, me too, no, you are not alone. Now, one of the big things that Chinese medicine talks about when we talk about the heart is we talk about joy. That is one of the emotions of the heart. Anxiety could be the opposite of the heart. And if we have excessive joy or excessive anxiety, we can cause heart issues. My previous podcast, if you haven't listened to it, I talked about the cardiovascular system. And cardiovascular disease is the number one killer of adults worldwide. And so this is something we really need to be thinking about. Emotions, extreme emotions, the heart, and what happens with the heart as we look for joy, as we're trying to get out of anxiety, what can we do? And a lot of times folks will think about their bucket list or what things they want to do when they can travel. And sadly, one of the biggest factors that I saw with heart health while living in Breckenridge was the impact of high altitude on the body. Even travel to Europe to some places, we will get into a high altitude environment, especially if you want to look at the Alps or say you want to go to Japan and you want to go to the mountains. So we want to be thinking about what these things can do good and bad for your heart. Now I want to tell you about something really fun. An Austrian study pointed out the benefits of exposure to moderate altitude for a 3-week period in patients with metabolic syndrome. And they found that there was improvements in blood sugar, improvements in the low density lipoprotein and high density, the good beneficial cholesterol. And that high altitude environment also has a great impact on folks' forced expiratory volume out of the lungs. And asthma in particular was studied in this Austrian study, but also other types of lung conditions. I find this fascinating. Another one of thinking about the cardiovascular system is the nervous system tie-in. And in Japan, there's lots of studies about forest bathing and going out into the forest. Now, you're not going out in your bikini for a walk in the forest. And it's something to really think about in terms of how that environment is actually doing some really cool things for even your cholesterol. Now, the other phenomenon here is that when we do go to do these joyous things and fun things and we plan for these vacations, sometimes leading up to it, we might be thinking about making sure we have our medications with us, making sure we have our herbs with us and our supplements with us, but we don't necessarily think about planning for a trip. And this is something I've long thought would be an area that I would love to help folks with. Because in Breckenridge, a lot of times I would hear the fire department and the emergency medical system get called out on heart attack calls. And one of the calls in particular happened right in front of our office one day, where an older gentleman was riding his bike with his family on the bike trail that goes from Breckenridge to Frisco, and he collapsed in front of the fire department. They were able to get him to the hospital and get some emergency care for his heart. So we thought it wouldn't be a big deal to come to Breckenridge and just start mountain biking, getting out on the trail and hoofing it a little bit with his kiddos. Well, didn't work out so well for him. So these are kind of things we want to be thinking about. We want to prepare for these trips. We want to make sure we are ready to go. Travel preparedness. This is a thing. Now, can you prepare yourself for high altitude environments and places? Now, with high altitude environments, the idea is thinking about how can you work on your cardiovascular system, maybe do some training, maybe going up and down stairs at your work. Same thing goes with hiking, walking, any of these things. Here's the deal. When you go on vacation, you walk an average of 20 to 30,000 steps a day. I saw this in a research article and was like, dang, that is like 3 times sometimes what someone would normally do in a given day. And that's a lot of wear and tear on the joints. It's a lot of wear and tear on the body, depending on weight factors, depending on how your lymphatic system's doing, depending on how your circulation is as a whole. I often hear from patients when they come back from Italy or other European trips that they ended up with blisters, their feet, ended up with rashes. Sometimes I get messages from patients while they're on vacation saying, Doc, what do I do about this? I'm getting rashes on my feet. I'm having heat rashes. I'm having trouble keeping up with my family, sticking with them on walks. I wanted to sneak this in here because I really think it's important to start thinking about the heart, circulation, lymphatic system, and how these things affect your travel. Because one of the biggest mistakes that I see with folks when they go on a vacation is that they try to pack in every little inch of space of time with something. If that's you, you're not alone. That's okay. I've done it too. Literally, you want to see everything you possibly can, and that means little room for downtime. Then you come back from the vacation and you are more tired than when you left. So how do we train ourselves for that? We really can't. It's more that you have to give yourself buffer time. You're getting more steps in. You're breaking in your shoes. Do not buy new shoes while on vacation and expect that to go well. I've done that. I've done that before. If any of you have ever been to Vegas and tried to wear shoes, you're going to get blisters. Same thing goes for being on the plane. Let's face it. I love the window seat. I don't want to get up and climb over everybody, right? And so I will sometimes not drink as much water because I don't want to have to get up during the middle of the flight. So we have to think about how we can get up and move. And maybe it is choosing an aisle seat and forgoing the window seat, even though you absolutely love to look out the window. The idea here is we've got to think about how we can pump the lymphatics a little bit, get up and move a little, do a little jig, maybe even do a little rocking, calf raises, heel drops. For some people, it takes a couple days for that swelling from the flight to wear off. So we need to think about this. This is a big, big deal. The other biggie is drinking alcohol on the plane and drinking alcohol at the airport beforehand, the night beforehand. This can really impact your dehydration and not feeling so great on the plane. This can also lead to palpitations and heart stuff on the plane. So we want to really be thinking about, okay, let's get the hydration, let's do the electrolytes, let's take our magnesium. Also incredibly important too, because magnesium is fabulous for helping with smooth muscle relaxation, calming the nervous system, and keeping the ticker going in a good way. Now, how much magnesium? Everyone's individual, but at least 150 milligrams of magnesium glycinate can go a long way. Don't do it the day of travel. Test it before to see what your best form of magnesium is. Some people need a blend. Some people need magnesium malate or threonate, and they're good. You got to test it. There is no one perfect way. You are individual. So how do we prevent this? We work on our blood viscosity. This is not the time to forget your fish oil. These are all herbs that help with circulation and thinning of the blood. On the plane, the air is recirculated. It is it's incredibly dehydrating. You want to stay on top of it. On top of the fact that you're going to somewhere that's high altitude, you want to start already on the electrolytes. There's also something called Acclimate. It is a specific powder tailored to helping you to acclimate to high altitude environments. I would consider getting something like that. There's also Diamox. That is something you can also grab if you're looking at high altitude exposure. I highly recommend speaking with your doctor to make sure that it fits for you, but usually you're going to start taking it before you expose yourself to a high altitude environment, and then you're going to taper off of it about 72 hours into the experience of being in a high altitude environment. Let's go to Colorado for an example. A lot of times what I recommend people do is stay in Denver for a night or two and then gradually move up. Maybe you move from Denver and you go stay up, let's say somewhere near Georgetown, and you stay there for a night. And then you get up into Breckenridge, Frisco, Silverthorne, that area. Just look at the altitude incrementally and plan. It's kind of like thinking about if you're going to climb Mount Everest. They stop at a base camp and acclimate. Same thing goes for these other altitude environments. Now, the other biggie is watching the exertion once you get there, right? We want to be careful about overexerting. You want to buffer a day in between because you want to make sure that you acclimate, you adjust. The time zones are different. That's another biggie that I think a lot of folks don't think about. And it's more speaking to those of you who are starting to get over 35, pushing towards 40, maybe moving into the 50s. Our bodies need a little bit of TLC. We can't just jump into things like we used to. Temperature in places, environment in places also makes a huge difference. Another big one that I think folks don't think about unless they're actively watching what they eat is blood sugar stability. It is very common for folks to feel a little woozy and dizzy, sometimes coming off of a long flight, especially if you didn't pack quality food with you. And maybe if you decided that you needed to have that gin and tonic on the plane, or maybe you decided to eat the cookies and then have the gin and tonic, but you didn't eat lunch, you skipped it. So we want to be thinking about mealtime. We want to be thinking about sleep, because if our sleep is disrupted, that can also mess with our blood sugar. Being sedentary can also keep us from burning off some of those calories and causing the blood sugar to spike. Now, one of my favorite tips is when I get to the airport, I don't sit right down. I walk all the different areas and then treat it much like a little hike and exploration. I want to look at all the different concourses that I can. I want to look at all the different shops. I want to walk around. That way I am moving. I'm moving my blood. I'm not just going there, sitting at my gate, staying sedentary, and then getting on a plane and sedentary again. Now, the other biggie is, of course, all of us know the food traveling is not the best option. So one of the other tidbits I can advise is I actually fast on travel days. I will tend to eat maybe in the morning a very good high protein meal, and then I don't eat again until if I get to the next location. Then I will eat something that I know is of quality food, versus trying to snack and grab things at the airport. Now you're going to remove a lot of variables and making sure that if you are flying out in a time that you can get a breakfast in, it's a higher protein breakfast. One of the biggies is hormone and menopause considerations. And this is where magnesium comes in. This is where the walking before the flight comes in. So making sure you don't forget your hormones if you are taking them, big deal. And then doing anything you can to optimize sleep. Now, the other biggie is heart rate variability and recovery from travel. And one of the coolest things that a lot of airports have are yoga and stretching rooms. You could literally do some yoga at the airport or go into a meditation room and just really work to breathe your heart rate down if you're having some trouble with that. I got to mention a couple more things about the nervous system, because so many people get nervous before they fly. Sometimes we get nervous about being away from home. Sometimes we get overstimulated while traveling. Sometimes there's just a straight up fear of flying that has you run into the bathroom before flights, but also can have you really anxious on the flight. We're all different. And what can happen is if we have these fears or anxiety about travel, we can end up with our already dysregulated nervous system being on hyper alert. So this is where palpitations might show up more, heart rate might get faster, hot flashes might show up on the plane when you've had them previously under control. And so some of the things you want to think about is making sure you've got magnesium, making sure you've got maybe L-theanine, which is an amino acid that calms the nervous system. The L-theanine, anywhere between 600 to 800 milligrams should be good enough to chill you. You might want to start slow. As always, I recommend testing it out beforehand. I also will even use things like lavender essential oils. I will, use EFT tapping, so emotional freedom technique tapping. You can tap your way through. Nobody knows what you're doing. You're just tapping on your hand. Maybe you're tapping on your chest. Maybe you're tapping around the top of your head. Tap it out. I love being able to tap. Music therapy, sound therapy, calming playlist. There are lots of different ways that you can really work to calm your nervous system. Even acupressure points like pericardium 6, which is where you put your knuckle in your wrist crease and where your fingertip touches, that's pericardium 6. You can press there and hold that. You can also tap either side of your chest bone, and either side can help you to calm the nervous system as well. These are spirit gate points. And so there's a lot you can do to work through some anxiety and stress with travel, and especially if the hormonal symptoms start to come up. Now, with travel, I have my must-haves that I need to take with me anytime I either fly, take a train, drive. So there's something called Cofix RX. It's an iodine nasal spray, one spray up each nostril every 6 to 8 hours while traveling. I love this stuff. I swear by it. Now, the other biggie is Beekeepers Naturals Propolis Throat Spray. Bee propolis is an incredible immune support. You spray it in the back of your throat. When you head out, when you come back in, spray it again. Love that stuff. Now, glutathione. Taking it orally might be the easiest way to go, to just get it through the mouth and move on. Euromedica glutathione tablets. I highly recommend starting taking these a couple days before you travel, throughout your travel, and then a couple days after getting home. It'll help keep your body's natural janitor and antioxidant on point. Now, things to have on hand should there be some issues. NAC, N-acetylcysteine, helps with isn't boost your glutathione, but it also helps with sinus congestion should you have some troubles with traveling, or if you're going to a place that has some environmental concerns, like LA often will mess with my sinuses. Plus, let's face it, air on planes is recirculated. It happens. Traveler's diarrhea is probably one of the other number one issues that people will complain about while traveling. Yes, you could use some probiotics to prevent this, and there are travel probiotics. I like the shelf-stable ones by Therabiotic, Symbiotic by Claire Labs. As I've heard from different travel guides, especially a pal of mine who is doing safaris in South Africa, he said usually about day 3 to 4, a gut bug kind of picture goes through a lot of his folks, and it just kind of hits people at regular intervals in that 3 to 4 day time frame. Typically, I will have folks work on the basics, and then there is a new commensal probiotic out there by Designs for Health called Complete Commensal Probiotic, and this is one I'm going to start implementing after travel to kind of help reset your gut ecosystem. So taking a probiotic while traveling, and definitely, of course, a shelf-stable one so you don't have to have it refrigerated, can be a game changer. Now, traveler's diarrhea. What do you do about that? There is one Chinese herbal formula that is hands down made for traveler's diarrhea. It's called Huo Xian Shen Qi Pian. It's a combination of patchouli, of all things, perilla leaf, and Angelica, which is donquai. Poria is another one. Pinellia root is another. Magnolia bark is another one in there. And the orange peel is tangerine, to be specific, for those of you keeping tabs on me. Licorice roots in there, and also Chinese date. So it'd be incredibly helpful for when either it's an overindulgence thing, like the food is rich and has lots of damp heat, as the Chinese would say, damp heat meaning it's greasy, it's rich, it's fatty, it's tasty, and it's new to you. Now, obviously, I'm not saying take this instead of seeking emergency care if you really need to, but this is a great option. And there's a brand called Active Herb, easy to get a hold of, activeherb.com, and they have it named under Stomacare. Otherwise, go to activeherb.com and get Stomacare and you'll be good to go. Now, other things I bring on trips, electrolytes, always important, especially while traveling. Electrolytes are key. Compression stockings. You could consider these if you have some real deal troubles with swelling. I do not wear them. I divert to bouncing and moving on the plane and tapping my feet and all kinds of other tricks. High protein snacks can be incredibly useful if they're not super high in sodium. There is Joburg meat. It is biltong, a type. It's like beef jerky, but it's not as salty as beef jerky. It's a good protein snack. Now, berberine could be a great option for watching your blood sugar if you tend to indulge in sweets and treats on your trips. So you could take some berberine when you have your desserts. Coenzyme Q10 is always great for the mitochondria of your muscles, but also of your heart. If you have heart issues, you worry about your heart, you want to just make sure you're doing all you can for your mitochondria. The coenzyme Q10 can be great for travel and just in general, especially over 40. It's one of my go-tos. Always bring a water bottle for yourself. I like the stainless steel ones that'll keep water cool. A lot of my friends joke as it's their emotional support water bottle. Love that. Resistance bands are a great go-to for me too, just because they can help with exercise while on a trip. And red light device. My Nova Lab red light therapy pad is probably like my new best friend when I travel, but it's great for just helping with you got any aches or pains because you've been walking more or doing new things, but also just with the digestive system. I tend to have more digestive issues, and putting it over my abdomen just makes me feel better and helps me feel like I can move my lymph a little bit better in the abdomen when I'm getting exposed to new foods. And then last but not least is essential oils. Essential oils can serve as an anxiety reducer, as I mentioned earlier. They can also help with sleep. They can also help with aches and pains and lymphatic movement. One of my favorite brands is Campo Beauty. They have amazing scents that are just relaxing and can transport you to the ocean and the desert and the just different blends. CampoBeauty.com. Now, while traveling, it's really easy to make some big mistakes. And one of them is not exercising. If you are on a trip that is not particularly a fitnessy kind of trip where you're out and about, it's maybe more of a travel trip for work. I highly recommend making sure that you are getting some movement in, even if it's bands like I just mentioned, or even just a basic push-up, squat, just body weight workout. The other biggie is not hydrating and not getting in electrolytes while flying or when it's hot out. It is so key to do that, especially if you're somewhere warm, especially if you have the potential for getting a sunburn. I was out sailing yesterday and I have quite the red face today, and getting exposure to the elements, especially if you're going to be on the water anywhere, it is very easy to dehydrate and miss out on electrolytes while you're out on the water. It feels cool and breezy being on a boat, but you are missing out on electrolytes and hydration. The other biggie, if you're in Europe, especially Italy and Greece, I've noticed that I gravitate towards wanting to have a little more wine. Rehydrate electrolytes after the wine. Make sure you are not overdoing it and dehydrating yourself further. Keeping ourselves too busy. Overbooking ourselves. One of the things I've noticed for myself is I need a buffer day between getting to the trip and after. And really just thinking about how you're going to have an integration day on both ends. Because you need recovery days, especially if you're going to be out and about and say one day you go on the hike, the next day you're going to go on a adventure to look at ruins or something. The other biggie is not bringing comfortable clothing. I know you want to look cute on your travels, but sometimes comfort over cuteness, game changer, especially when it comes to your shoes. If you notice that you're swelling in your ankles, this is something you don't want to ignore. You want to get your feet up. Even if you're noticing it after a long day and maybe you're at a restaurant, put your feet up on a chair. Just get them feet up, because the more you're swelling, the more you're going to have issues with your footwear. Got to get those legs up in the evening. Even if it helps to go swimming, sometimes just that non-weight bearing movement can be incredibly helpful. Got to move during your flights. Do not just suck it up and go, I don't want to bother anybody. I don't want to look stupid. Just get up and wiggle. Even if it's just wiggling, tap your feet, whatever it can be, just to move. Sleep. Prioritize this. So important. And I know a lot of people are going to sleep in on their vacations, and I know other people who are going to overbook the daylights out of themselves. And from dusk till dawn, they are busy, busy, busy. You want to make sure that you are getting in sleep. I started this podcast off talking about the cardiovascular system, talking about how we want joy through travel and how we absolutely want to be prepared for the two extremes: extreme joy, extreme cardiovascular stress. Now, what are the red flags where we need to be like, okay, something's wrong? Chest pain that won't go away. Shortness of breath that you're not able to overcome. Fainting, of course, would be an obvious one. Sudden swelling of your ankles, your hands, where it wasn't there, and then boom, it's all of a sudden there. Anytime you have one-sided calf pain that's stabbing in the calf, that is definitely going to be an indication the clot might be forming. And so I want people to be hydrated, electrolytes, and making sure that you are taking either blood-thinning herbs or even just things that help keep the viscosity up in your blood. Like, obviously, if you're already on blood thinners, don't do any of that on top of it. But you're noticing that you're starting to swell a little bit more on flights. You are prone to be a little bit more sedentary, or you're on an overnight flight to Europe and you're not going to get up, you're going to lay down. get in a baby aspirin just in case, or take some of the Chinese herbals that are out there. You don't want these things to ruin your vacation, and especially if you're spending a decent amount of money to go on an epic vacay, take all the precautions. So with all that being said, you do not need to stop traveling because you've got blood pressure issues, because you've got cardiovascular disease. Even if you have dizziness and swelling, you can overcome these and you can work with them. You want to kind of train for these trips. Think about what you're going to be doing and how you can kind of prime yourself ahead of time so that your body's ready to handle stairs, ready to handle hills, ready to handle 30,000 steps a day. You also want to think about nervous system support here. What can you do, whether it's Tai Chi, Qigong, working out, meditation, breathing, whatever it may be, build it in to your timeframes in your trip so that you are supporting your nervous system, so you're not pushing it and burning it out during this trip. We don't want you to be afraid of traveling. I want you to be happy and ready to go and having that joy so that it doesn't turn into anxiety for these trips. Travel is such an incredible transformation for the body and for the mind and for the soul. Because Travel and Transform is a new aspect of my business, I want you to know that I am ready to take consultations on travel and what to be thinking about for your particular trip. I also have connections as a travel advisor with the Fora group to be able to help you coordinate a travel trip. Let me know. I am happy to help you to coordinate a healthy travel and transform trip. All right, you have survived another episode of the Health Fix podcast. Have a great day, whatever you're doing. Hey, fellow health junkie, thanks for listening to the Health Fix podcast. If you enjoyed tuning in, please help support me to get the word out about the podcast. Subscribe, rate, and review, and just get that word out. Thanks again for listening.